On this episode of Big Boys Don't Cry, we discuss the film The Fifth Element. You don't have to have seen the film to enjoy the podcast, but if you do listen without having seen the film, just be aware that there may be spoilers. Enjoy.
Hello.
Hi. It's the fifth element. The fifth element, yeah. I didn't have an actual song this week, unfortunately. Did you?
No, I did not either. And my thoughts about coming up with one have been slightly disrupted by the fact that America is on fire.
Yep. Because the Democrats won in Georgia, right? Is that what happened?
Well, I don't think it's just because of that. I think it's also that they're not going to overthrow the legitimate election results that saw Donald Trump lose. And so they've stormed the Senate and...
Who have? Pro-Trump people.
Pro-Trump people. Basically, a very bad coup by idiots is currently storming the Senate, and it's quite scary. So if I seem distracted at any point during this episode, that's why.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you might have been talking about how Kim and Kanye are getting divorced.
I mean, that is obviously the most pressing issue at the moment. That and Bean Dad. Have you been?
Yeah, I have. This is very, very strange to me because I've been a fan of John Roderick for quite a long time. So if I was to see that, do I want to talk about Bean Dad? I don't want people to think that I'm pro Bean Dad. I don't want to get cancelled.
I think
it's only Wednesday.
Let's talk about Bean Dad and let's get hashtag Paddy is cancelled. Hashtag Paddy is over party going. Say no to Paddy.
And then when I come back, I can have Paddy's album party.
Yeah, Paddy's album party.
Anal bum party.
We get you a sweet ass spot on Parlay, and we'll get you a spot on Joe Rogan's podcast talking about cancel culture.
Well, as we all know, this was all just a long con to get me on Joe Rogan, right?
Exactly. I'm in two minds about Bean Dad because the historic tweets that they drummed up about Bean Dad. I didn't know this guy before Bean Dad, so I'm just going to refer to him as Bean Dad. For context, for anyone
you were
who
not
doesn't
at the show when the Long Winters played at the Cavern in Exeter. It must have been when we were in second year.
I was not there. No, I don't think.
Yeah. I was.
Oh, very good. Did he say any racial slurs whilst he was on stage?
No, he did not. No anti-Semitic content that night.
So he has done this. He's one of these Gen Xers who's a little bit risque, a little bit blasé, which is a very big thing about Gen X. You know, the Gen X era was very big in that kind of thing, both in terms of general attitudes and the media that was created during that time. And I think that kind of follows through to this story that he tells on Twitter about how he's teaching his daughter how to use a can opener by getting her to work it out herself. And it's clear that he's really upping the ante of what the actual atmosphere was like during this, saying like, we didn't eat for 6 hours and there was tears and stuff like that. And it's clearly all said in a really comedic manner. People did not take kindly to this story, which I think is fair enough. Because there is this kind of, it could be very triggering for people who didn't have a very positive home environment, and it might feed back to how they were treated poorly by their own parents and things like that. But at the same time, it's clearly comedic. And it's clearly kind of a lie. This did not happen exactly the way this put down.
Do you think that actually happened?
No. And I think he did he did an apology afterwards where he said, we did eat between the beans incident and her opening the can of beans and things like that. It clearly didn't happen like this. And at the same time, people pulled out all of these tweets that he said, which were very bad tweets.
Yeah.
With lots of racial slurs, homophobic slurs, things like that. And so he has now had his song taken off the McElroy Brothers podcast. He's deleted his Twitter account. I don't know what it means for the rest of his creative sides, but I feel as though it's a is it hashtag Rob is over party as well? I feel like it's a bit of an overreaction.
Oh, are you going to be over as well?
We're
all in this together.
Big Boys is over party. Half of Palomino is over party. I won't drag down the other two with us. They can replace
Hannah
us
and
if they
Catherine
want.
can form a new band.
They can form a new band.
Synth and drums duos always work out.
Yeah, exactly. They don't need us. But I think it's a bit of an overreaction. I feel a bit sorry for Bean Dad. The story was shitty, but it became one of those silly Twitter moments. You know, you get them every so often. There's that one incredible tweet, which is every day on Twitter there is a new main character, and the goal of Twitter is not to be the main character. Yes. And I think it's fair to say that Bean Dad was the main character of that day. And I think if they hadn't been able to dig out all of these slurs that he'd said, I think it probably would have swept over with a little bit of this guy's a shithead, but not to the same extent that it eventually did. And I feel as though, you know, when you've got literal Nazis storming the Senate, it's just going on right now, there's probably people who deserve cancelling more than Bean Dad.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say? I think what Bean Dad...
Yes, 100%.
Bean Dad...
John Roderick is not a Nazi. He ran for Seattle City Council a few years ago, unsuccessfully, on a very, very left-wing platform, among other things.
Yeah, Bean Dad told it... He that's his name now, by the way. I don't care
Bean Dad.
if his name is Matthew Broderick. Get away. We don't care. Bean Dad is... he told a stupid story online, which obviously had backlash, sort of rightfully had backlash because it was insensitive, but at the same time, people maybe should have realised it was a joke.
It's just some bullshit on Twitter.
It's just Twitter bullshit.
Is that the thing that you want to direct your energy at? Because there's a lot worse bullshit on social media you could be directing your energy at.
There
is
is
the thing I think about all of this kind of stuff. As you say, it's the main character. That main character tweet is so revealing and so true.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes a thing gains traction and then there it is. And that's like, you know, and social networks deliberately do this, don't they? They deliberately amplify stuff that, you know, is controversial and that becomes a moment. They're prone to virality because it makes them money.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole purpose of social media, is to get into a binary of good and bad, but more important to social media is this worth sharing and speaking about, or is it not worth sharing and speaking about? And this moment didn't matter if it was good or bad, it was worth speaking about. And it turned into this negative moment. He shouldn't have said that awful shit several years ago on Twitter.
No.
That's an obvious thing. He should not have done that. And if you're in the media, if you're the person who does the McElroy Brothers podcast music, you should probably wipe your Twitter if you're worried about something like that coming up in your past. I think, you know, cynically, I'm thinking it's the same as a politician. If you get elected to office, or if you're at the point of getting elected to office, you need to wipe your Twitter feed.
People will find it through the Internet Archive, though. That's the thing.
Yeah, but they won't know to look at that until someone's found something for the first time.
I feel like it's always going to come out. Someone's now going to dig through my Twitter feed looking for dirt in amongst my probably 5 to 6 years since I joined of earnest tweets about indie music, and then we start our podcast and it becomes about that. That's pretty much it. If you really want to trawl through that, then go ahead.
I've got some political stuff in there, calling Nazis shitheads and things like that.
There might be some fuck the Tories content in there. I can't promise that.
Yeah, I'm fine with people realising that I do not like right-wing arseholes. That's fine. I'll keep that in there. That's no problem. And that doesn't mean that I don't like anyone who's right-wing. I mean specifically arseholes. You know, get out. We don't like you right-wing arseholes.
Do you like anyone who's right-wing? I don't know if I do.
I
don't know, some old family members.
Well, yeah, exactly. Old family members, old co-workers who are nice in other ways. Gary Newman is a Tory apparently, and I like his music.
Really?
Yeah, Gary Newman's a Tory apparently. I don't know how he feels about the rest of it, but
Well, Tories love cars, don't they?
here in my car, I am hurting the poor and polluting the world. That's the best thing about this car. Da 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 da. Do you like my song?
Very good, very good. That makes up for the lack of an opening song, doesn't it?
There we go. So yeah, basically, social media is really bad. Bean Dad
Fucking
is
stinks.
bad, but doesn't
If
deserve
we didn't
to
have
his
to promote
life.
this show, I wouldn't be on social media, honestly.
I wouldn't. I keep thinking about getting rid of Facebook because Facebook seems to add literally nothing to my life.
I only use it for messaging one specific family group that I have on there, which we use to plan the family quiz. And other than that, I don't use it. Actually, although I posted on there yesterday about subscribing to my new baseball newsletter, my Baseball Essays Illustrated, Stealing Home. I did a book. You'll remember this if you listen to the show
Yes,
for a while.
I remember.
I wrote a book
this.
about baseball, and it's based on essays that I send out by email because I don't want to post. Anyway, I put a Facebook post on that yesterday and got like 2 likes. So fuck you all. That's all I really have to say about Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook is bad. Twitter's bad, but is occasionally funny, and that's why I keep my Twitter around. Is for the funny moments. And Bean Dad was a funny moment until it turned into a not funny moment. And I feel like that's kind of. I remember the days when Twitter was just funny moments, when it was just bullshit. And there was that really nostalgic feeling. Did you see the hot dog man a few days ago as well?
No.
This
Who's
guy
the hot dog man?
put a hot dog in an air fryer for 10 hours or something like that,
God.
and was just detailing the status of the hot dog every so often. That was very, very funny, and that made me feel like, oh yeah, that's old Twitter, when someone would do something stupid like that and it would blow up and it would be funny. And Bean Dad was kind of like that until it got a bit overboard.
Yeah.
And Bean Dad,
I went on and saw Bean Dad was trending. I was like, oh, what's Bean Dad? Someone's told a weird story. And then I was like, oh my God, it's John Roderick. This is insane. This is a guy that I know and much of whose work I like. This is going to get weird very, very quickly because he's a fringe figure. He's well known, but not like well known, not a household name, not well known that like people who might hear about a trend would know about him. You know, he's a guy you know about if you know about him, and you don't if you don't, if you know what I mean.
yeah.
But his podcast, Roderick on the Line, it's like one of my favorite ever podcasts. So he does it with a guy called Merlin Mann, who used to be like a productivity guru and is now just like a really cool podcast guy. And he's not had a great time of it because he had this other podcast, Due by Friday, which was co-hosted by Max Temkin, who was cancelled last year because he was the co-founder of Cards Against Humanity, who created a toxic work environment there. So that's like 2 cancellations of Merlin's co-hosts. But I don't know if Roderick's going to keep doing the show or not. But so Roderick on the Line is a great show.
What you're saying is, Merlin should join our podcast.
Yes.
And because we are uncancelable. We're 2 good boys. We haven't done anything wrong ever. The
goodest good boys. We're like Labradors.
I haven't done anything cancelable, I think, in my life at all. I'm a very good boy.
You're an extremely good boy.
And I know you're a good boy as well.
Who's a good boy?
We're 2 very uncancelable boys. We could be McElroys. That's how uncancelable we are.
Wow.
I'd say. McElroys, give us a line. We'll
McElroys, if you're listening,
we'll write your new theme tune.
Genuinely, we could, and that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I would be so happy to do that.
But yeah, I think, we've not done anything cancelable. So Merlin, come over here. And what else I'm hearing is that you're willing to overlook all of the horrible infractions of Bean Dad because you like his podcast. You hypocrite. That's what I'm hearing here.
There's no nuance to this. It's not a complicated situation. I stand Bean Dad.
You stand Bean Dad. You will die for Bean Dad. You're going to storm.
Yeah. I will die on this hill of beans.
Yeah. Bean Dad is... the way I see it is Bean Dad is bad for what he did, but primarily what he said historically. Bean Dad seems like a bit of a wanker, but in a funny way, like a lot of Gen Xers. Probably shouldn't have had his life ruined over a series of tweets, to be honest. I think that's maybe a little bit too far. When you've got people like Lawrence Fox or Isabel Oakeshott or Alison Pearson,
I'm gonna be
getting away with monstrous stuff every day.
Can you believe Lawrence Fox used to be married to Billie Piper?
The chinless wonder. Insane. Have I ever told you who Lawrence Fox is? Lawrence Fox is when they took Fido Dido, the mascot of 7-Up, and put it into the machine from The Fly with a normal human man. And what came out of the other side is Lawrence Fox, this chinless freak.
But why would Billie Piper want to marry that?
Curiosity. Maybe she's a fan of David Cronenberg's work and wanted to know what it felt like.
Yeah, that or she drinks a lot of 7-Up.
Yeah, maybe she's got a Fido Dido fetish. Do you remember Fido Dido?
No, I'm going to have to look it up.
Yeah, Fido Dido was
Fido
cool.
Dido the singer who did that song with Eminem? Stan, yeah.
I don't know why I've got no chin at all.
Oh, good, yeah. He's like a sort of proto-Purple Ronnie.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Everyone knows Purple Ronnie.
This triangle chin freak. That's who Lawrence Fox is. Lawrence Fox. If you're listening, don't listen anymore. We don't like you.
Do not listen to our show. It's not for you. You are
you
barred.
Don't deserve
Get
our
out. You're barred.
You're barred. Get out, mate. If you'll put your picture up on the wall saying bad human being.
It's going to be our podcast artwork from now on. Just a picture of Fido Dido with like a red line across his face saying barred.
Fuck you, Fido Dido. Yeah, so Lawrence Fox, not a fan. Probably a worse human being than Bean Dad. I think it's fair to say.
So yeah, to sum on Bean Dad, no, I think the stuff he said on Twitter was bad, and I've never actually liked him on Twitter, but on podcasts where he can talk in long form, he is great, and he's a really, really interesting guy who's had a very interesting life and always has interesting takes on stuff. And he is also bipolar and has had a lot of issues and struggles with his mental health, and the way he talks and conducts himself in social settings, including on social media, reflects that, I think. And on Twitter, his personality and how he operates just never came across well. And that is not a defense of anti-Semitic tweets, obviously, where they were always said kind of, ironically and in jest, you should always think about how things can be perceived and how people are going to listen to them and the medium and the context and everything, what you say. But, he is someone who works better in long form, and as you say, should not have had his whole life ruined by this. And his apology was, sincere and heartfelt, and I think it's worth reading if you're still outraged about Bean Dad. When you should be outraged about Lawrence Fox.
You should be outraged about Fido Dido. Or you should be outraged about Paddy Johnston's outrageous defence of Bean Dad.
Pro Bean Dad.
Pro Bean Dad. Yeah, and I think that's interesting because it's very hard to portray your own personality on social media, isn't it? Particularly if... again, sort of bringing this back to the Gen X element of it, it's... having that kind of snark, which is clearly slightly playful, doesn't really come across well on social media. And I think particularly when you've got these much more open and direct and earnest generations that followed up. So you've got us, the millennials, the soy boy beta cuck generation who were desperate. The woke snowflakes who were sort of desperate to succeed in the way that our fathers and mothers did and failed, but have this kind of openness, but in a kind of timid way. We've been followed up by the greatest generation, the Zoomers, who are just fucking open about anything, and they'll go 1 minute saying, lol, did a poo, to we must overthrow the government and instill true democracy, with nothing in between, and I love it. And I think that really clashes with Gen X snark in quite a severe way, and I think that's actually quite an interesting generational divide that you've got there.
But I also don't think the Zoomers are on Twitter reading about Bean Dad. The Zoomers are all dancing and showing their bums on TikTok, aren't they?
No, I think there's quite a lot of Zoomers that are on Twitter as well. Particularly, you've got sort of like the gaming sphere and the left-wing gaming sphere, which is a very interesting place because people think about video games as being quite a right-wing place, but actually there's quite a big left-wing element, particularly amongst the young generations that are playing games, and that's very interesting to see. And you've also got sort of like the LGBTQ community, and you've got quite a lot of Gen Zers in that as well.
Yeah.
And I think those kind of people, they look at things like snarky Gen X stuff and they think, this guy's a little bit close to being a boomer, and and it's sort of, this old man is a dick, but you're not realizing that he's not being a dick he's being a dick in a playful way, because the current reality doesn't have the same detachment that Gen X had, where they're like, lol, nothing's wrong, we've got Bill Clinton in charge, it's all fine, or we've got John Major, or the early days of Tonty Blair, where they had
Tony P. Lyer,
where they had these kind of institutions which were quite solid, and life was slightly more convenient, whereas then you had our generation who had recession and depression,
financial crisis,
and then you've got the Zoomers who have the destruction of democracy on their side. They do not have the safeguarding of thinking something's in jest, because their genuine way of life is in peril. Whether it's from the rising far right, whether it's from the global pandemic, the terror of institutions which previous generations were complacent about, like the police and things like that. And so I think there is this very interesting divide between the almost satirical nastiness of Gen X content and the earnestness of Gen Z. And I think it's interesting. It's interesting, but also very depressing. And I kind of feel sorry for Bean Dad, I've got to say.
Yeah, and the thing about social media is that it collapses all of that stuff into one huge weird pot, doesn't it? There's the phenomenon known as context collapse, of which there's been much interesting writing about.
Yes, exactly. And I don't know how.
If you're curious, I really, really would suggest you go and listen to Roderick on the Line, because you'll get a sense of a guy who is interesting and has, a good personality and is a good person. It's a great show, and he has other shows that are good as well, but that one is always very, very conversational and free flowing, but it still doesn't go on for 3 hours like Joe Rogan. It's what people think is good about Joe Rogan, but is good in Roderick on the Line.
There we go. This podcast brought to you by Bean Dad. We've been Bean
Dad, I know you listen every week.
We've been sponsored by Bean Dad.
He has tweeted at me once. Bean Dad.
Hashtag cancel big boys. We're apparently now we're both Bean Dad fans. It's our first cancelable event, and I apologise profusely. Paddy doesn't. Paddy is an unrepentant Bean Dad supporter.
I will never apologise for supporting Bean Dad.
Paddy is now going to starve his own child, because that's what Bean Dad did. That's how strongly he feels about his support for Bean Dad.
And give him the can opener tomorrow morning and say, you do it.
I'm gonna leave the cat with her bag of kibble unopened and say, right, cat, if you want to eat, you've got to open that without your opposable thumbs. And then I'm gonna live tweet the whole thing and go, lol, look at my stupid cat, it's hungry, lol.
Yep. That's the part that I think as well. It's like, you don't have to tweet.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing, isn't it? Is he tweeted all the way through this event? Well, not all the way through the event, but he
was like
detailed
a 20 tweet thread.
He did this massive tweet thread about not feeding his child.
If I was a successful podcast guy like him, I wouldn't even bother being on Twitter. Honestly, it's just
I think
waste of time.
The issue is that if you want to do it, you've got to just be positive all the time, haven't you? You can't be a negative individual or leave anything that might be controversial. You've just got to be a positive guy. Like if I was a popular social media figure, my thing would just be, yo, this band's cool, go and listen to these guys, or yo, I like this podcast and this guy's not a Nazi. You've got to do your research, haven't you, before you share anything. But yeah, that kind of thing, and that's kind of what I use it for some of the time. Is like if I find a good album, like I found a very good album, by the way, by a band called The Dirty Nil, which I don't know if you know The Dirty Nil.
You sent me this, didn't you? Did it have a dog on it?
It has a dog on it, which is always great.
I haven't listened to it yet.
The album is called Fuck Art, which is a great album name.
Like that.
And it's good old punk rock, and it's great. So yeah, go and listen to Paddy says listen to Bean Dad by the collected works of Bean Dad.
Yeah. You can get them in one book, like those like big Shakespeare things you get. It's just got a can of beans on the cover, like the Campbell's soup can. It's like that.
Yes, yeah. Paddy says
beans.
Paddy says sign over your soul to Bean Dad. I say go and listen to Fuck Art by the Dirty Nil because it's a very fun album. And
I'll put the link in the show notes.
I think people will like it. But none of this we have not talked about. We've been talking for like half an hour now.
Yeah.
And none of this has been about our movie.
This is still a film show, we promise. There's just a lot of stuff we need to catch up on. And it's like, I think part of the reason people who are long-term listeners to this show enjoy it is because it's kind of our weekly catch-up about stuff as well, right? That's what I hope, anyway. And honestly, Roderick on the Line was an influence on my approach to that. I mean, it's organic anyway. Sorry, I keep going back to it, but like when we started doing this show, I was a fan of Roderick on the Line and their kind of weekly catch-up setup. And I was like, I want to replicate that with you because you're my best friend, but I also want to talk about goofy films. So here we are, almost 200 episodes later.
I had never listened to a podcast before doing this show. I did not know what a podcast was. And to be honest, I still don't know what a podcast is. What is a podcast?
It took a lot of convincing, actually. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I mean our carrier pigeon show.
Yeah, our carrier pigeon show. That's right. I record this and then I put it on a hard drive and I fly it via carrier pigeon to Paddy, who then I think sends the carrier pigeon off to the Greater Carrier Pigeon Network. With our musings. I think that's how it works. But we are a film podcast, and this week we had The Fifth Element to talk about. And is this a movie that you'd seen before?
Yes, although not since I was about 15, and I had very little to no recollection of it. So it was basically like seeing it again for the first time. Every scene was like, oh my god, it's young Luke Perry. Oh my god, they're crashing into a McDonald's truck. Oh my god, it's like a party in space. Oh my god, it's Chris Tucker. Why wasn't this Prince? It's Chris Tucker again. Why wasn't this Prince? It was all of that happening to me again and again and again, and it was a great feeling. I loved it.
Yeah, I hadn't watched this in a very long time. It's a movie that I used to really love when I was a kid. And then I don't think I've watched it since university. So like a decade now.
You mean when we studied it in that class about Jean-Luc Godard?
Yeah, exactly. Famous creator of The Fifth Element, Jean-Luc Godard. I'm going
to keep making that joke, just so you know.
Yeah,
every time it's mentioned.
I know you are. But I really liked it when I was younger, and I was a bit worried coming back to it. It's like, oh, is it still going to be fun? And I think it is still fun. And is it fair to say that this is a very good shit piece?
I wrote down potential shit piece ? And I think it is. I think, especially now that we have the context of having, was it Jupiter Ascending that created the concept of a shit piece?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Right. Now that we've established Jupiter Ascending as the kind of the tentpole shit piece. Is that the right term? I don't know. The tentpole shit piece. Wasn't that a punk band?
The shit pole, I think, is the correct term for it.
The shit pole. Now that we've established Jupiter Ascending as the shit pole, I think Jupiter Ascending actually owes quite a lot to The Fifth Element. That's not to say that it wouldn't have existed without The Fifth Element, but there are a lot of similarities, and that this is maybe the Jupiter Ascending of the 90s, but because there wasn't social media. This is I'm going to be positive about social media and about the kind of the media landscape of when Jupiter Ascending was released versus 1997 when The Fifth Element came out, that like there just wasn't this ability to talk about the shit piece, was there?
No. And the one thing that I will say,
all you had was critics, like us,
awful critics able to give their opinions on movies. I prefer the modern system where racists can downvote films by black people or women to make sure that they get really low user review scores. That's what's great about the modern age.
It's called democracy.
It's called democracy. Democracy is being bombarded by racists until people don't want to see your product anymore.
Yeah. Democracy means having to listen to Lawrence Fox talk about why lockdown is bad and people not dying is bad.
Yeah, you've got to have both sides. You know, you've got a deadly pandemic going round. But you've got to listen to the guy who says that it doesn't exist, because you've got to hear the opinions. Every opinion is valid.
Tonight on BBC Question Time, death. Is it really so bad?
We've got the owners of Mortuaries Incorporated and a doctor, but we're going to give 70% of the time to Mortuaries Incorporated.
Who will speak up for the funeral people?
Yeah, exactly. And you've got a bit of that in this movie, don't you? Because literal death and destruction is coming to Earth. That's the villain of this movie.
The great evil.
Yeah.
The non-specific ball of evil.
Yeah, that's the villain. It's this big old death ball, and there's this argument made against the villain, the brilliant villain in this case, played by Gary Oldman.
So good, absolutely iconic performance.
Yeah, fantastic in this. The 90s was the era of Gary Oldman as the great villain, and I'm here for it.
Like there is definitely a through line from that through to Eddie Redmayne's character in Jupiter Ascending.
Oh yes, yeah, definitely. But I think there's this great moment where they're saying you're standing for death and destruction, but and then the sort of reply back from Gary Oldman as Zorg is
Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel de Zorg.
Yes. No, I'm creating, because when destruction happens, then you've got to have people to clean it up and things to rebuild and everything like that. And it's like, that is such a fucking Lawrence Fox statement, isn't it?
Yeah, I watched that whole speech and I was like, that made no sense, Gary Oldman, and I still love you.
Yes, yeah. But yeah, the one thing I would say about this as a shit piece is this movie too good to be a shit piece?
It's on that borderline, isn't it? I think it's walking the tightrope. I think it starts off as a non-shit piece, but it starts to lose its way towards the end, doesn't it? Once it gets to the point where they're sort of at the airport traveling to the intergalactic fun gala, I think that's when it becomes a shit piece. Is it? Now, here's a question for you. Is it possible for a film to become a shit piece halfway through?
I think that's definitely true. And it's funny, that's the moment of this movie that I love the most, is the whole Leeloo Dallas multipass all the way through to Chris Tucker having sexual relations with a woman as a spaceship's flying off. To massive explosion.
In the way that they did in films quite a lot in the 90s, where sex, rather than actually showing sex, it was all you saw was the top half of a woman while the man was down there, which I think confused a lot of people of our generation. Like, he was out of view down there doing God knows what.
Well, just playing Warhammer or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, she's orgasming to that.
Yeah, exactly. The sexual emperor of mankind.
Yeah, he's playing on his Game Boy Color.
Yeah, he's there on his Game Boy Advanced.
Was the Game Boy Color out in 97? No, it would have been the Game Boy Pocket, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it was. The Game Boy. I don't think the Game Boy Color was out in 97.
No,
but
no,
yeah,
I was in secondary school when the Game Boy Color came out, I think.
Anyway,
but that doesn't matter. Let's talk about the film.
Let's talk about the film.
I think we've already used up our bullshit allocation for this episode, so
That's true.
We need to crack on. Okay, Game Boy Color was released in Japan in 1998.
Okay,
international market, same year. There you go.
But I think I do think this movie is too good to be a shit piece, and I think it's kind of shit piece maybe goes up to where it's a quirky, iconic cult classic, and I think anything below that is a shit piece, and I think this goes into that quirky, iconic cult classic, if only because of the costume design, the number
Jean-Paul Gaultier,
indeed, by Jean-Luc Godard.
Yeah, costumes by Jean-Luc Godard.
Yeah.
They'd all be naked because a lot of his work is Emperor's New Clothes. Am I right?
Oh. Yeah, etc.
That's a joke for like real film critics, not people. If you've ever seen Film Socialisme.
Oh dear. But yeah, it's but yeah, I think there's so much iconic stuff going on with like the costume design, with the action moments, with the cinematography, that I think it's maybe a level above a shit piece, but it is that kind of proto shit piece that's really led to things like Jupiter Ascending.
Yeah.
I don't think Jupiter Ascending could exist without The Fifth Element. And it's almost as though I don't hold it up on the same level of Star Wars, but I think it's got the same kind of creative ingenuity and intuitive sci-fi world design that Star Wars had. So obviously thematically and tonally it's a very different film, but you can look at this and go, that's a really cool sci-fi world, and it feels like a unique sci-fi world, in the same way that you can look at Star Wars and feel the same way. And I think that's kind of the key to making those kind of big sci-fi epics, is they've got to feel like their own contained world. And I think this movie really exceeds in that regard.
Well, what's better than this about Star Wars in that context is that it's only one brilliant 2-hour self-contained film. It doesn't take 9 films to tell you that Gary Oldman, who died in the first one, also had sex and is alive now somehow.
Do you reckon Zorg fucks?
Yeah, of course he does. With that haircut.
Oh yeah, who wouldn't want that? And the little soul patch. He
looks like a metal frontman, doesn't he?
He looks like the lead singer of
bassist in Rammstein or something.
Lead singer of Refused, I think.
He does.
Had a similar kind of hair for a while, didn't he?
Dennis Lixon.
And
Punk icon.
But yeah, so I think that it's got all of those incredible moments, but also all of these really weird little things, like, you know, you've got Blue Opera singing Alien Woman, you've got tiny-headed slow spacemen, you've got Tricky. This is great. I love seeing Tricky in this movie. You've got the weird little bouncing balls that get flamethrowered as they fall off the spaceship. There's all of these tiny little moments in this film that just make it feel great. It's those little bits, like how clearly in this future, when you get a cigarette, the filter is extremely long and the actual tobacco is very short.
Yeah.
And it's just those little moments that really make this world feel like a real interesting place to be, and a place to lose yourself for a couple of hours.
Yeah, and there's stuff like, you know, he's in New York and there's flying taxis everywhere. Like it looks like Futurama. You know, Futurama came out later, but you know what I mean? It looks like Futurama. And that's not even really explored or anything at all. And I think a lot of lesser filmmakers would have been tempted to explore all that stuff too much. But even though it's quite a long film, it doesn't really go deep on any of the characters that much or anything, does it? But it still executes them really well, I think. And part of that is to do with the cinema movement of the time, I guess, was known as Cinema du Look, of which Luc Besson is known as one of the forerunners, where it's all about the spectacle, right?
Yes,
and this film is a spectacle.
Exactly, and I'm glad you brought that up, because if you look at the sort of the history that he has, and going back to his early movies, like, sorry, this is going to get very film school arsehole-y for a while, but have you ever seen Taxi?
We've already said Jean-Luc Godard several times. I've never seen Taxi. No.
Oh, okay. Because that's a really fun. That's a really fun little movie.
That's the one where he goes, "Are you talking to me?" Right.
that is Taxi Driver.
No.
But
I haven't seen that either.
But that kind of thing where you've got because he was like the writer of Taxi. And that's very much a sort of silly, sort of very much spectacle-based movie that moves very, very fast and very interesting. And that was, I think, it might have been around the same time as The Fifth Element. And you really look at that kind of thing. You've got Leon as well, a couple of years before.
Leon, I have seen. Yeah, that's a great film.
Which is a wonderful movie.
Very young Natalie Portman in that.
Yes, yeah. Which I think it was her first role as well.
Sorry, give me a sec. I've just got to go get the baby monitor. It's gone upstairs.
Oh, Paddy's off to go and get the baby monitor. So, to all of our listeners, can I just recommend that you get the podcast trending with #PaddyIsOverParty. We cannot stand for the amount of standing that he's doing for Bean Dad. Is unacceptable in the black and white world of social media usage. we must condemn Paddy for this atrocity that he's carrying out by supporting said man.
What shit you saying about me?
Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing at all. But then, and then even if you're looking back to his earliest movies, like I think the first thing he ever did was Subway.
Yes.
Which is a really interesting movie about all those people who are like living in the Paris metro, isn't it? They're living in the subway system of Paris. You've got Christopher Lambert with his massive hair. And again, it's all about that sort of spectacle and all about that the visual aspect of it, but doing so in a way that helps create these self-contained worlds that you can become enraptured with in a short amount of time.
Yeah, and it's simplistic to say that it's just about the spectacle, but it's also quite, revealing to think of a film in those terms, isn't it? Where, the spectacle doesn't just mean explosions, it doesn't just mean colours, it doesn't just mean costumes by Jean-Paul Gaultier Godard. It means, as you say, little details as well. Things like the cigarettes, things like him forgetting to feed the cat, things like his always hearing the voice of his mother, but never seeing his mother while she's calling him to tell him what an asshole he is. It's things like that make for a really, really enjoyable film watching experience, I guess. It's about the experience as well as the spectacle.
Yes.
But the spectacle is part of and is the experience.
Exactly. And that's precisely why this film works so well, is it's got all of that going for it, and there's always something that helps create the world in your head, and that in a way allows its characters to stand out. And what I didn't remember is how memorable the different characters in this movie are. Even the minor characters just kind of immediately stand out to you and go, oh wow, that's a really cool person who's in it for like one scene.
Lee Evans.
Yeah, and the casting is great because you've got all of these incredibly bold personalities in this movie.
Sweaty 90s comedy icon Lee Evans.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? You've got all these people that just appear for a relatively brief moment and just really add something to the movie. And it's a challenge to have a film where Bruce Willis is the lead and he doesn't completely dominate the feel of the movie. But this is an example of where that doesn't happen. You look at him at his best and it's films like Die Hard or The Last Boy Scout or films like that, where he's really a powerful lead figure. But here you've got Ian Holm, you've got Milla Jovovich, you've got Gary Oldman, you've got Blue Singing Lady, you've got Chris Tucker.
Tucker is so good.
And all of that just really adds to this movie to make it this incredibly enjoyable watch, even however many years later.
Yeah, for sure. And you got young Luke Perry at the beginning. Yeah,
ruining things for everyone again.
Yeah. When the sort of Hayao Miyazaki-esque robots turn up.
Yeah, the little alien dudes come along and then he shoots one of them.
Yeah.
But it ends up ruining it for everyone. Because they got trapped inside, the poor bastard.
There was also the production design was done by Moebius and also by Jean-Claude Mézières, who is the guy who did the Valerian comic books that Luc Besson adapted into that film, which is probably also a shit piece that we should watch at some point.
Yeah, I do really want to watch that. I've not seen it, but I really hope that it sums up because what's it called? The Incal as well is one of his iconic works. That he did with Alejandro Jodorowsky, which was basically when they couldn't make the adaptation of Dune that they wanted to make, they went and did this really strange sci-fi comic book instead. And I really love that, and I think you've really got that kind of feel here in The Fifth Element that really brings that home.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a beautiful film. It's really pretty, even in its stupidest moments, like the big old trash piles which are completely unexplained. You've got all this fog at the bottom.
Sorry
of the city.
about the garbage.
Yeah, it's just great. It's really great. It's just it's a really I suppose iconic is the way to describe it. And, maybe it's
Yeah.
just iconic amongst geek circles, but I think there is something very special about this film.
Yeah, I think if any sci-fi film at all is a hard pass for you, then this is not for you. But if you have even like the vaguest interest in sci-fi and you haven't seen this, like I think it's a film you really, really need to see. It's a really, really important pillar of 90s cinema. And at the time, it was also the most expensive film ever made, wasn't it? So, like, it's really important in the history of cinema. But I think it has a very important place in the sci-fi canon as well, in which, as you say, the scales begin to tip towards the shit piece in 1997, and this is the reason.
Yeah, precisely. I think, yeah.
And a couple of years later, The Phantom Menace tried to tip them in the other direction, but it failed.
Yeah, screw you, Phantom Menace. You were strange and uncomfortable in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's... man, I really love this movie. But the question for me is, my memory of this film is that it had a lot more of a romantic element to it.
Yeah.
And I apologise, because on the rewatch, there's not... To be blunt, I seem to remember there being a much more of a romantic focus.
It's love that saves the day, right?
It is love that saves the day, but I seem to remember there being more of a focus on the relationship between Corbin Dallas and Lilu.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah. But on the rewatch, it is kind of just there.
Yeah. You've literally known her for 24 hours and you decided you love her to save the world. Ridiculous.
Yes, yeah.
That's a shit piece move, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's it is.
And if
a
anything,
shit piece
the end of the film is fantastic because it's just got them like they're doing it in this like sauna thingy and some kind of I don't know what the song was, but it was like a sexy 90s song that came on. And it just like you just see a little bit of it, and they're like everyone knows they're in there. It's just like, that is ridiculous but hilarious. And of course, how else are you going to end a film like that? So it ends with that romantic, sexy moment.
It does, and the still shot at the end. It's just beautiful. But what I like is the end of this movie is kind of low key. You've got the big shootout and the explosion, and then the movie continues for a bit where they solve this puzzle with some little blocks.
Yeah,
and then that's really cool. It's really cool that they did that. Whereas, yeah, it's just, it's fascinating and weird. And I wish more movies took this as an example. Instead of
I thought you were going to say I wish more movies took risks like this, which I think would also be true.
Yes,
right?
yeah. I think more movies should take risks like this. You look at sorry to go on about comic book movies again, but comic book movies are everywhere, and none of them take the risks that they need to do. None of them would end with a bunch of people trying to solve a little puzzle to save the world.
I'm looking forward to that in the next Iron Man.
Avengers does Rummy Cup. That's what I would assume.
Justice League. It's just Ezra Miller and all those other guys like standing around a Rubik's Cube going, what do we do with this?
Riddle me this, Batman. They're playing Trivial Pursuit. That's how they end the next Batman movie.
I would watch the heck out of that.
Yeah, I'd watch that. I think that would be really fun. So yeah, bring it on. That's what I want. If you're listening, Marvel / DC.
The next Batman versus Superman is literally just a chess match. It's been playing chess for 2 hours.
Yeah, that's what I want. And I think the thing is that there's room for that. And I think Joker showed that you can do something with that medium and do something interesting, even with characters that are very well known.
I still haven't seen it.
Why not do a Batman movie where he is a detective and he's trying to solve a crime?
Yeah. The hard-boiled Batman.
Yeah. Why not do something like that? Or why not go back and do a really over-the-top campy Batman like the 90s ones? Give that another go and try and do something interesting with it. Why not do I'm trying to think of a Marvel hero that could work quite well in this regard, but try and do something low key with, you've got Spider-Man fighting all of these villains in a very big way now. Why not try and do another low key story about him?
Just like Spider-Man helps an old lady cross the road or whatever.
These heroes, they have different strengths and different personalities, And if you look at why people got into them in the first place, it's not for the big battles, it's for the smaller moments, or for the interesting character moments. You know, no one...
Spider-Man does a masterclass on web building, which you have to pay $100 to watch on YouTube.
Exactly. I want to watch the Flash start a hate campaign against a popular podcaster on Twitter.
Bean Flash.
Yeah, Bean Flash. That's what we want. Or like even examples like, I don't know if you ever saw the Netflix series of The Punisher.
No.
Because that was very interesting because it basically didn't do anything superhero-y. Because he's not a superhero. He's a disturbed vigilante who's done horrible things and is now getting back at the people who have done horrible things to him. And they just completely went away from any of the superhero nonsense and just nailed down that element. And it worked incredibly well. And I think there's room for people to do that and room for people to explore in ways like that. And, you know, why not make the next, and I suppose the Guardians of the Galaxy movies kind of feel a little bit like The Fifth Element, but I think they could go even further in that regard. Like there's these little vignettes in those that feel a bit Fifth Element-y, but I think they could go even further into that space. Or like do a Silver Surfer movie, which is just all of the space nonsense that the Silver Surfer's about.
Yeah. It's goof factor, isn't it?
Yeah, get that goof factor.
We need more goof factor.
Yeah, exactly. And so bring that out. Do that in your movies. Have fun. Play with things. Be experimental. That's what we want.
Yeah, for sure. We need opera singing blue aliens who have the puzzles inside them. That's what sci-fi films need.
That's what sci-fi films should be. That's what we want.
So the romantic element is ridiculous, but within the context of the world that it creates, it's totally believable, right?
I don't know about totally believable, but it works, doesn't it? It works thematically.
Yeah. It's fine. Like you sort of have an inkling that that's where it's going, right?
Yeah. You kind of get that sense, don't you, that it's going to go down the love will save the world thing.
Yeah.
Like good old Frozen 2.
I thought you were going to say Harry Potter. But...
Centrist dads will save the world in Harry Potter.
Wizard cops. But yeah, Frozen 2, she is the fifth element. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
At the beginning of Frozen 2, they take her, like, a bone out of a sarcophagus, and the people of Arendelle make her in, a big glass cage.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works.
Yeah. Scared a lot of kids, that one.
Exactly.
But that was I like how you chose this after that for that kind of vague thematic link.
Yeah. I mean, where else was I going to go with it? Go to an actual romantic movie? No.
Hell no.
But mentioning Harry Potter, I think at some point we should do all the Harry Potter movies.
Yeah.
I think that would be fun.
We couldn't do just one episode about those, could we?
No, we'd have to split that out.
Yeah.
But I think that would be fun to do at some point.
Could we do like 2 at a time, maybe?
We could do a Harry Potter month and do them 2 at a time, couldn't we?
That'd work over 4 weeks.
Yeah. Harry Potter month. When's Harry Potter's birthday?
July 31st.
Okay, so July leading up to Harry Potter's birthday.
Yeah, July is Harry Potter month.
Let's do Harry Potter month.
Yeah. Wizard cops and centrist dads, you're going to love it.
I can once again share the story that made your wife recoil in horror about how the best way to deal with wizards was to be a wizard with a wand in one hand and a hammer in the other, and then just bashing people in the head when they get too close. And that's how you beat Voldemort.
You can't argue with that, can you?
No, you've got fucking Lucius Malfoy in front of you going, Avada Kedavra, and you're deflecting his blows and you're getting really close. Wouldn't you think, I really wish I had a hammer right now just to smash him a bit? Bash, bash.
Yeah.
You can't, there's no anti-hammer spell.
That's true. If there is, Jason Isaacs knows it.
Yeah, exactly. He'd know it, but he doesn't because there isn't one.
Have you seen that ridiculous film he's in where he's like the manager of a hotel in a volcano?
What?
This came out, what's it called? Fire. This came out last year. And apparently this is a potential shit piece. I don't know if it's got any... What's it called? I don't know if it's got any romance in it, but it's called like Firestorm Destruction or something. I heard about this on another podcast. I'm going to have to look it up. Talk amongst yourselves.
I'm just looking up Skyfire.
Skyfire, that's the one.
Oh my days.
It looks ridiculous.
Oh wow, that is this is clearly a Chinese movie based on the cast.
Yeah. And apparently he has a South African accent in it.
Oh,
because he based his character on Elon Musk, and just started doing the accent, and they were like, "You don't have to do that," and he's like, "I'm going to do it anyway."
I'm going to do it. I love it. Oh man, we need to find this movie. That looks so bad. I'm all for it. Yeah, I like a bit of Jason Isaacs.
He is great.
He's very. Have you watched Star Trek Discovery?
No, I have not.
Because he is in that and is very good in that. Yeah, he's a good one. He's a good one.
Yep.
He did some voices in Star Wars as well.
Yep.
Which is always nice. He was in the Rebels TV series. And yeah, no, he's a good one. We like him, but I would bash his head in with a hammer if he was trying to Avada Kedavra me.
Well, yeah, that would be fair.
Yeah, you gotta do it. You gotta do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, right. Is there anything else you want to say?
He wasn't in The Fifth Element, and he should have been. Yeah, just that Chris Tucker's role should have been done by Prince.
I mean,
he was probably busy with something else.
Prince was clearly the inspiration for that role, wasn't it?
Maybe actually after Under the Cherry Moon, I don't know what was next in Prince's filmography. But yeah, that was very Prince, but in the best possible way.
Yes.
Yeah, that was great. And what else? I just really, really appreciated the simple title sequence. There were some bits of it that were sort of actually quite simple, weren't they? But there was, for a weird sci-fi epic like this that shouldn't be simple. But I think as you say, the cinema do look approach is simple in one way, because it's like, we're going to give you something brilliant to look at, right? And I keep coming back to it, but that was that was another thing that I appreciated about it as well.
Yes,
it wasn't overblown, despite being a film that is naturally overblown because of what it is.
No, exactly. It's not a film that's overly, up its own bum, I suppose.
That's exactly it. Yeah, it's unpretentious.
Yeah, it's earnest in its approach.
Yeah. What was Prince doing in 1997?
Was he getting albums released via the Mail on Sunday?
Yeah, well, he was always doing that. This was just when he's just changed his name to the unpronounceable symbol. Okay, so yeah, he was a bit tied up with that, wasn't he?
Bit busy with not
doing all his record label stuff.
Yeah.
But he did release a subsequent film later on that we're going to do at some point.
Yes. Yeah, we will do that at some point.
Yeah.
So I've got a little bit of trivia here. So Mila Jovovich beat over 3,000 women who auditioned for the role of Lily.
Wow.
Which is pretty awesome.
She's great. She absolutely nails the role, I think.
Yes, yeah. She's brilliant in this. I really love her in general. I know that people kind of laugh at things like the Resident Evil movies, but I think she's got this kind of charisma which really carries those films. And I think
the first one's a good shit piece, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I think the first couple are excellent shit piece films, and then they kind of drift a little bit. But I think she's underrated, and I think is an interesting actor who should be in more fun stuff like this. But apart from that, Luc Besson started writing this when he was 16 years old.
Yeah, I read that, and that's what I was going to say. That's the other thing I wanted to say, was that I appreciated the vision of this, that really came across, that this was a kind of a grand vision that had obviously been in his mind for a really long time. And sometimes that results in nonsense, but it really, really worked here, and you could tell that in a good way, I think.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And Prince and Michael Jackson were the sources for inspiration for Ruby Rhod. And Prince was the first choice for the role, but obviously I think he might have been a bit busy. And just one other little bit of trivia for you. Gary Oldman played Zorg as a cross between then presidential candidate Ross Perot and Bugs Bunny. Which is amazing.
Sure. That explains the sort of Texan, vaguely Texan
Yeah,
accent.
I think it's great. So it's great. I like this movie a lot, but I think I will have to deduct some marks from it because it is not really romantic enough for this podcast, even though love saves the day, I think.
Yeah. And there's a sexy scene. And there's multiple scenes, aren't there, of him sort of looking into her eyes while there's a bit of porno sex going on.
There's a lot of porno
So I
sex
think it's
going
quite romantic.
But yeah, I'm not sure that. Yeah, I think maybe I do apologise for choosing this. I don't necessarily think it fits the podcast as well as my brain thought it did, thinking back to when I last watched it.
Yeah.
But never mind. I'm sure we will get back on track soon.
Yeah, we will.
So how are we going to rank this bad boy?
Let's see. How many people, after you have boarded the plane, how many people turn up with a multipass and try to board as you in the airport when you're flying off to the Intergalactic Opera Gala?
So yeah, that is it's quite a long queue actually. So you've got a solid 14 people coming my way, pretending to be me to get to the space journey.
Yep, same here. 14 fake Jeremy Corbyns coming after me.
Watch out for all those fake jazzers.
Yeah,
Magic
there are lots of
Grandpa.
them about. Lots of Tony B. liars.
Lots of Tony B. liars. Oh dear.
Very good, very good. No, that was a really, really good choice. A nice sort of palate cleanser after all that festive nonsense.
Yeah. Screw festivities. This is what the people want. So what have we got next?
Yeah. Well, I think we do need to go back to a sort of a classic romantic film at this point, don't we? And we've had a request for My Big Fat Greek Wedding, so let's do that. That's kind of the staple. It's our bread and butter, isn't it?
Oh man, I'm excited.
Yeah.
Gotta love a bit of fat Greek weddings.
There's a link in our show notes to where you can give us money if you want to. It's just like a tip jar, no commitment, nothing like that. And you can find us on Twitter at BigBoysDon'tPod and on the emails BigBoysDon'tCryPodcast@gmail.com. Let us know if you have any requests or anything you want to hear about. And we'll be back next week to talk about My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Bye!